I would like to start this event today, here on Wednesday, May 27th. Welcome everybody, and those joining us right now coming in into the event. Welcome to our event on supply chains in times of disruption and disease. Our main speaker today will be Chris Ross of MilliporeSigma, and the conversation will be moderated by David Womelsdorf of Ernst&Young. I am Emily Westhofen, the Executive Director of the German-American Business Council of Boston, and we organized this event today in partnership with the French-American Chamber of Commerce New England and the German-American Business Council here in Boston. If you are not familiar with it, is a membership-based organization bringing together and promoting exchange between the German and American businesses as well as business people, and fostering the relationship between the two countries. We are a networking organization, and having shifted, as these times require, and all you know very well, to a virtual format, and it is therefore my pleasure to be able to host this virtual event here today for you. I would like to thank in particular our two speakers, which will be introduced momentarily. But I also want to mention that MilliporeSigma is an important supporting member organization of the GABC, as is Ernst&Young, an important supporting member organization of FACNI, the French-American Chamber of Commerce. So thank you to both companies for your continued support. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome our attendees here today, in particular members of the German-American Business Council and the French-American Chamber of Commerce New England, as well as attendees who may join us today from Germany, from France, from here in the New England region, and all over the world. And I believe many of you are actually joining us from MilliporeSigma as well for this interesting virtual event. So thank you for tuning in. I have a few housekeeping items I just would like to share at the beginning of the event. Every participant is on mute by default and off camera. And after the introduction of the speakers, there will be a presentation portion, which will probably last about 20 minutes. This will be followed by a moderated Q&A. If you have any questions that that come up, please do send that through the chat functionality that you have there on your screen. If there is a technical glitch, which we hope we don't have, but you never know, and the meeting is disconnected, please reconnect to the same link that you started that tuning in here. And this event is being recorded as we speak. So with that, I would like to welcome our two speakers and invite them to join us here on camera. All right. And here they are, I think. Chris, you're there?
I am here. I am here.
Hello. Hello. Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us here today on this event let me just move one slide here of this event. Our question today is, how is MilliporeSigma managing the global production and supply chain amidst this pandemic? And if we imagine limited airline cargo capacity, closed borders, manufacturing facilities that have shut down or downsized, things we read in the media, but your company is actually ramping up production on products that are needed in the fight against the pandemic. We are wondering, managing effective and efficient global supply chains has been a complex operation even before COVID-19 hit, but it has now become obviously a lot more challenging. So we're really looking forward to hearing your take with MilliporeSigma on this, and leading us through that conversation Q&A will be David Womelsdorf. And David, thank you very much for joining us here today. Let me introduce you briefly. You are a senior partner, America's industry market leader, health, science, and wellness at Ernst&Young. And you are currently responsible for leading the healthcare and life sciences segments across the Americas. And you have over 30 years experience within the pharmaceuticals and healthcare industries, including working for Merck, which is the other Merck. And I know, Chris, you will be talking a little bit about Millipore and the relationship to Merck in Germany. And David, you work for Bristol Myers Squibb in a variety of roles within the commercial operations. You joined Ernst&Young Global Science Practice Leadership team in 1997, so quite a long while ago. And since then, you have led some of Ernst & Young's largest global clients within the life sciences sector, including Wyeth, Bristol Myers Squibb, and Merck. And in 2018, you assumed responsibility for the life sciences segment, and in July of last year, took responsibility for the combined healthcare and life sciences market segments across the Americas for Ernst & Young. So very familiar with the pharmaceutical companies, including Millipore. So I will turn this over to you now, David, to introduce Chris Ross of MilliporeSigma, who will then do the presentation after that, followed by the Q&A. So thank you very much on behalf of the GABC and FACNY New England for doing this here today. And we're really looking forward to this discussion. Thank you very much. David, you have the floor right now.
Thank you very much, Emily, and thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to join you and your members and colleagues from MilliporeSigma as well. I'm joined here today by Chris Ross. Chris is the Executive Vice President and Head of Integrated Supply Chain Operations at MilliporeSigma. Chris is responsible for leading the global manufacturing site network, supply chain planning activities, and distribution center network for the life sciences business. With a global team of greater than 10,000 employees, the Integrated Supply Chain Operations organization that Chris leads is driving life sciences manufacturing strategy, capital investments, operational excellence, and supply chain management processes to improve costs, quality, and delivery of products for MilliporeSigma's customers. And as you'll hear, Chris has very much been in the middle of how MilliporeSigma and all of his colleagues have been responding and helping clients and customers around the world during this pandemic. So with that, I'll turn it over to Chris. I know you have an overview to provide, Chris. We look forward to hearing that.
Excellent. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Emily, and thanks to the GABC for hosting. Great pleasure to be joining everybody, even in these virtual conditions that we're all in. So interesting times indeed. And I think, Emily, as you said, and Dave, as you mentioned, complex supply chain and a complex network that we're managing within our life science business under the best of times. And now, of course, very interesting times indeed with the pandemic. So let me start off maybe with a little bit of introduction. And, you know, as David and Emily said, I'm responsible for our integrated supply chain operations for MilliporeSigma. And simply put, in addition to David's kind introduction, it's about our capabilities in global manufacturing, global distribution, and global supply chain. And if I go to the next slide, MilliporeSigma is the life science business of Merck KGaA, Darmstadt, Germany. So this is our relationship to our business and to our company based in Germany, based in Darmstadt. We're known as MilliporeSigma here in the US, but we are Merck Life Science globally across the business community. And our Merck company was founded in 1668, so we've been around for a very long time. And our life science business annual sales of roughly $7.5 billion US dollars, and 22,000 global employees across our entire network. Important to note that we're 70% family owned by the Merck family. And the company is structured in 3 different businesses, one in healthcare, one in performance materials, and of course, our life science business that I'm representing today that we'll talk a little bit more about. Maybe to the next slide. So really, you know, the headline says it all. You know, in fighting the pandemic, it really is about working together and as a global community, as a global family. And I would say one of the first important points to make here is our company based in Germany has really set out 3 key principles for us to use in our decision making and to guide the actions that we've taken in this pandemic and even during good times, but in particular here during this pandemic. And in fact, the first thing that was done when we entered into this situation was to create a crisis management team based in Darmstadt, really as a focal point for all of us around the world, and to look at the things that we should be considering, the things that we should be working through, and providing global guidance to each of our businesses in every location globally. But the guiding principles really are three. And for me, these three really have played a very, very important part for me as well in the supply chain area. And first is really that safety is first, and the well-being of our employees and their families is job number one, and it's our top priority and should guide our decision-making accordingly. Secondly, as a life science company, really the importance of the role that we play for public health. So our products are for sure necessary in the public health environment, and we take that responsibility very seriously. And the third is really about business continuity and making sure that our business stays in the short run and the long run sustainable, and we're making the right choices for the short, medium, and long term. So those three really were the principles that we've used in that priority to really help guide the activities that have taken place over the last months. So really what I'll talk about here briefly is these four areas, that as a life science business, our goal is to solve some of the toughest problems in life science with the global scientific community and provide access to health for people everywhere. And for sure that continues to drive us in the response to the COVID-19 situation as well. And we've really leveraged our people, and we'll talk about how we started really with our focus on people, our response, our products, and I'll tell you that we are a company with a very broad portfolio in the life science space with over 350,000 products, not the least of which are 150 very critical, very specific for the COVID situation. And our global presence. We distribute our products out of 100 different locations globally. We manufacture out of 59 different manufacturing locations, so our global presence has played a significant role here as well. Next slide. So our people, as mentioned, 22,000 strong, and with our number one priority to make sure we maintain safety and health and well-being of our employees, realizing that that's job number one for a number of reasons, but not the least of which is also to make sure that we're able to continue and ensure the ability to manufacture and distribute solutions that are necessary for the COVID response. So that responsibility, again, we don't take lightly. So the first and very most important step we took in the process was to really safeguard our sites. And we looked very much at our manufacturing and our distribution network as our essential sites. We quickly established the nature of our facilities. So in many lockdowns across the world, we asserted ourselves as an essential business that we maintained being open all the way through the process. But what we needed to do is really look to safeguard the employees, safeguard the facilities, and we very quickly back in the February timeframe throughout Europe moved all of our employees who could work from home to work from home. So part of our de-densification of our sites was to maintain our essential workforce, producing, R&D, distribution, fully capable to work by having those that could work from home work from home. We took the precautionary measures that everybody else did as well, with personal protective equipment, with regimented cleaning, and also instituted testing. We took some time, and this was also a very strong push from our Darmstadt colleagues, to determine what we could do with in-house testing, PCR testing, to determine whether or not we had COVID-19 positive cases. As you can imagine, with contact tracing activities across our wide network, when people were suspected to have been in contact with or had symptoms of their own, we needed to, as everyone has, determine their contact tracing situation. Who have they been in contact with a certain period of time, and then quarantine individuals. For our essential workforce, that was difficult because it put many people who could be working in our plants or in our distribution centers at home, waiting for quarantine periods to end. So by taking testing actions internally, we've been able to put testing regimens in place in many of our critical sites such that we know exactly what the situation is, and we can bring people back to work safely and much earlier than we could in the past. So many different solutions, much like this Zoom meeting we're having today, we've been able to dedicate many activities in electronic format, virtual meetings with customers, certainly keeping our engine moving across the entire network with many tools and techniques that probably many of us thought were not possible, that today are working extremely well. So, but really keeping our people safe, leveraging technology, leveraging the de-densification to keep the essential workforce really able to do what it needed to do. Next slide. And, I won't go through this. This is a lot of detail here, but I mentioned, our start in earnest here was in our European site in France. And of course, we've been following and working with the COVID situation since its inception in Asia and in China. We have many people and many operations in China and throughout the APAC region. But the first time that we actually had incidents of the COVID-19 situation and test positive situation to deal with was in one of our French sites. It was toward the end of February. I'll never forget. We were having a team meeting actually in Darmstadt with my global team, and got the call that one of our employees' spouse actually had contracted COVID, and this individual was in contact with their spouse, of course, and also had come into work. So this was before we were talking about social distancing and talking about de-densification. Those words weren't really in our vernacular at that time, but we very quickly had to come together as a team and determine what to do, who to send home, what regimen to put in place, how to deal with shift structures, how to get people back to work safely, and managing the concerns that individuals had. This all came to life for us in the early days of February 26th, and I would say this was the first of 59 other sites that went through the same process over the course of time throughout the pandemic, and from Europe into the Americas, and of course, now starting to resume normal operations in our APAC region as well. But really ensuring employee safety was born, if you will, very much so at what happened at this French site when it first impacted us in a significant way. Next slide. So our role in public health is significant. We produce raw materials and products used in the research, development of vaccines, diagnostic tests, and therapeutics. And this is across all therapeutic areas, but also specifically for those fighting the COVID-19 pandemic as well. And our customers who we serve are in academic labs, they're in biopharmaceutical companies, and also food and beverage companies as well. And you see a little graphic here with our position across the world. We have sites, 59 manufacturing sites, as I mentioned, all over the US, South America, Europe, and Asia. Next slide. And our problem solving and our support and our engagement with the scientific community is really quite advanced as well. And so we're supporting right now with our products 18 different monoclonal antibody and plasma products, 46 different vaccine programs, many of which we hear about every day, 25 different testing solutions with our customers, and then 4 antiviral programs. So in every aspect of how the pandemic is being fought, our products are supporting each and every one of those areas. Next slide. And to be a little bit more specific, if you break it down into the virus detection, virus characterization, and vaccine therapy production, let me start with virus detection. So 2 really key diagnostic technologies for COVID-19 response, and we hear about these every day in the news, and also many of us involved with them directly as well, but RT-PCR, or molecular diagnostics, to determine whether or not an individual has the COVID-19 virus. And for us, we are involved with patient sample collection. An example here is clonidine thiocyanate, a material that's actually used on the swab that you hear about in terms of collecting samples from patients. We're involved also with the RNA extraction with a product called proteinase K, and also the RNA amplification and detection element of testing with our oligonucleotide primers and probes. And the serological testing as well. And here, this is to determine or detect the presence of antibodies in individuals. And an example here is our lateral flow test strip membranes. We make high flow membranes in our Cork, Ireland site. These membranes are used in diagnostic test kits. In this case, test kits where you prick your finger and look for a blood sample to apply to the membrane to determine whether or not you have presence of antibodies. So in all aspects of testing, some examples of products that we're producing and trying to give to the market in an aggressive way, as many of these companies who are working on kits and testing are needing our support. If I traverse to the right of this slide, very heavy work in the vaccine and therapy production area. So we have a vast portfolio in the bioprocessing area, from cell culture media to bioreactors to clarification and tangential flow, chromatography, sterile filtration, single use, many different aspects of the bioprocessing work stream. We have products in that space. And so here, the demand for these products is rather significant. The customers who you'd expect, who are in the news, who are working very diligently on therapies and vaccine development are the ones that we're working very closely with here. And the demand, as I said, for these products is really quite extensive. And you can imagine, with our job number one being to keep people safe, and of course, job number two, making sure that we are serving the public needs here for health. It's balancing the need to keep our people safe while keeping our plants and our distribution centers running at a very high pace to make sure that we are supporting, as we can, these critical customers who are doing amazing work to find solutions for us. Next slide. And our global presence has been really a benefit for us. And we started very early on with a global task force so that our supply chain teammates across the world could really come together and make sure they fully understood customer needs and were able to take action rather quickly. You can imagine that our sites were challenged in manufacturing, as I mentioned, with dedensification and social distancing and with different shift structures, and certainly not working at 100%. But also our distribution networks across the world were challenged. And Emily mentioned a little bit of this at the beginning. We put most of our products on either the ocean or on an airplane as we're transporting them globally. And we manufacture globally, we distribute globally. We really need to be able to move products very quickly throughout our global network. And as we know, passenger aircraft have really stopped. And you don't see very much going on at all across the oceans here between Europe and the US, and with China and Europe and the US. So all of a sudden, a major trade lane for us, a major transportation lane for us had really gone away. So these teams really having to figure out how to get products moved from point A to point B, leveraging different modes of transportation, leveraging cargo versus passenger aircraft, different transportation lanes in different locations where we need to bring products through. Many approaches were looked at here. This global task force was invaluable to us to really understand how to move products from point A to point B. And if I go to the next slide, just to give you an idea of how important it is to move products around a global network, the journey of this proteinase K, I mentioned that as a critical component of testing. And it's an enzyme used in molecular biology and used to isolate and undamage DNA and RNA. And for us, this is a critical component in very high demand, used in molecular diagnostic kits, and it originates from a fungus. And I won't go into too much technical detail here, but one of the major steps in the process is to ferment the materials, the raw materials. And we do that work in two locations, one in Darmstadt, Germany, and one in Jerusalem, Israel. And once that step is completed, the products move to the US, to Temecula, California, or to St. Louis, Missouri for final packaging and final product applications. And then from California and St. Louis. They're distributed either in California or in Milwaukee or back in Womelsdorf, Germany. So we're sourcing materials from different parts of the world. We're producing materials in different parts of the world, and then we're distributing products in different parts of the world. And this has to work extremely seamlessly and get to customers in a matter of a few short days in some cases. So how we're actually managing across this network has been one of the big benefits, I think, of our global distribution network, as well as our task force that has looked at ways to move the products efficiently through a difficult time. Next slide. And this is the last slide. And, you know, we're now across the world stepping into what we're calling focused vigilance. And this is really the next phase in the process where we're starting to think about redensifying. And, you know, in a stepwise approach, starting in Asia, moving now into Europe. We started 2 weeks ago in Germany, in our German facilities. And slowly we'll begin to move in this direction here in the US as well, but a stepwise approach for redensification, you know, and looking at what does physical distancing mean as we start to prioritize bringing some of our work from home individuals back into the office. What protective equipment, additional measures might we need? What testing schemes might we need? What additional hygiene and cleaning needs will we need? What changes with regard to our travel guidance? How will we report what's happening with the pandemic and infection rates and whatnot? And data management, a very important topic here, is using big data, looking at ways for automating some of the work that we're doing with contact tracing, looking at how in the US in particular, or in any country, we're getting guidance from a state, from a county, from a region across the world on what exactly the governments are asking us to do. And what kind of infection trending data do we have in each part of the world that would indicate to us that we have an opportunity to start coming back from where we were before. And risk assessment screening, including questionnaires for visitors and employees who come to a site, or temperature screening, all these measures that we're trying to put in place here. And then a framework for employees and for leaders to be able to leverage in terms of tools, training, and available resources, if you will, for how to maneuver in a time like this. So these are the factors that we're using right now in the framework for implementing, again, this phase now that we're entering a focused vigilance as we start to move past the high points of the pandemic. So just some insights, some points of view from my perspective to share with you from MilliporeSigma, from Merck KGaA, Darmstadt, Germany perspective, and hopefully that gave you a little bit of insight. I know many of you are all facing the same challenges, but one perspective to share for us.
That's great, Chris. Thanks very much for that overview. And before we get into questions, and I see, Emily, you have a very smart audience, I was going to remind folks that if you can go to the chat window, you can type questions in, and we'll try to get to some of your questions as well. But why don't I start off, Chris? You know, as I listen to you, it's interesting. It's clear, you know, that you run a large, complicated business. You know, many products. Many manufacturing sites, distribution sites. I can only imagine the volume of suppliers and you know, materials that you procure. I mean, just the complexity is enormous, you know, in normal times. So you know, you've managed, and obviously you've managed through a ton of complexity over the last 3 months to keep the business moving, to continue to get your products, your important products to your customers. What do you see as some of the ongoing challenges that you're still facing, you know, and how would you prioritize those? How do you think about that as a leader of this organization?
Yeah, no, thanks, Dave. I think good question. You know, the prioritization, I think, still comes from the frame that I shared earlier. You know, that employee safety still is first, public health second, and then business continuity third. So I think these principles really started at the beginning, and they continue to frame the work that we're doing now as we think about the challenges every day. And with employee safety, we're constantly thinking still, as a challenge, what do we need to do differently? I mentioned the implementation of testing. A big factor for us, really has been instituting the availability of testing for our employees so that we know what's going on and we can act accordingly. And this has been difficult across the world because in many parts of the pandemic timing, it's been very, very difficult to get the PCR testing that you need. So being able to develop some of that capability internally and then deploy it to some of our sites was really key. But the factor of safety first continues to be a challenge, and finding ways to continue to make sure that as we bring people back now and really push for more from our plants and more from our distribution centers, that people are safe. I would say, we're also facing challenges with demand patterns, and they're extremely diverse. You can imagine. Let me give you an example. So across the 59 manufacturing sites and 100 distribution locations, we're dealing with, let's say, a tale of two cities. The first is, we support researchers on one part of our portfolio with 250,000 different products. So reagents, chemicals, a variety of different kits and products that are needed for researchers to do the needed research. In this case, research for a COVID-19 solution. Much of that business, much of that market is academia. And of course, we know today that in a lot of our academic institutions around the world, the researchers are not in the labs. And so what was a very high demand product area for us in the research space, the day-to-day experiments that researchers are doing in their academic labs, that's really come to a pretty significant halt. And now it's starting to come back in Asia, and it's slowly starting to come back in different parts of Europe. We'll see eventually it start to come back here in the US as well. But dealing with that demand pattern has been quite a challenge, because suddenly we got very much a change in the types of products that customers are buying from us. On the complete other end of the spectrum, in the space of bioprocessing, therapeutics, and vaccines, we've seen enormously high increasing demand from our customers, specifically for single-use systems. So single-use systems used throughout the bioprocessing, manufacturing, and development areas. Plastic devices, plastic vessels, plastic tubings and setups and systems and solutions there that are used to really rapidly bring products through the development and manufacturing process. So many products that have been in very high demand. So how do we deal with that in times when our sites are challenged with output? Because we've taken safety measures to de-densify, we've taken safety measures to social distance, and they're in contrast with one another, because we need so much to use every bit of capability and capacity that we have to meet customer demand, yet we're challenged. So we're at the same time dealing with the safety concerns as we are trying to hire and bring on more employees in areas where our capacity is being challenged and stressed. Where do we need to advance our capacity through investments, where investments might have been planned for even 12, 18 months from now that need to get accelerated to today? So this is how dramatic some of the demand shift has been on that side. So very much trying to balance the difference between the two, definitely.
And Chris, what about your suppliers? I mean, obviously, you're running your business as you've described and managing all the complexity and the changes in demand in your business, but you must have a very large number of suppliers that are located all over the world, right? Some locations impacted greater than others. How has that further impacted you? What are you learning from that experience in terms of maybe how you may reimagine your supply chain going forward? Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, it's a good one. Yeah, we have a large supply base. It's a global supply base in most regions of the world equally. And I would say we have a pretty extensive procurement team as well. And it's a global procurement team that supports our life science business that is very much connected with our sites, connected with our technologies, So this procurement team is very capable and has been aligned with us throughout, finding the right partners for us globally. So that helped. So our network of suppliers is very strong. But I would say in these times, what we've been able to do is really leverage the extensive nature of this global procurement team and our supply base to find alternatives where, you know, our suppliers are not unlike us, where they too have the same types of constraints depending on where they are in the world, and they're facing some of the same challenges we are. So capacity has been a challenge. But I would say, to be honest with you, Dave, at this point, we have not had any showstoppers in terms of our ability to find alternative solutions, in our ability to find partners or work with our current partners who've been able to scale up and ramp up with us. There are certain areas where the challenges are higher than others, but I would say everybody has been stepping up dramatically here, and we've been finding ways also to get the raw materials moved from point A to point B. One example I'll give here is a good one, actually. We have a raw material supplier in India that is producing a material that we use in Switzerland in one of our manufacturing sites that produces an active pharmaceutical ingredient. So a very critical product that we produce for a healthcare facility. And just about the time that India went into lockdown was just about the moment, as it always is, where we needed that shipment from the Indian supplier to get to our Swiss site. And of course, everything shut down, so they couldn't get it out. And this is where the global network comes into action. So our supply chain, our distribution, our trade compliance, and our corporate and government affairs folks got together, you know, talking with the governments of Switzerland and of India, the embassies, and describing the situation and having them understand what's really happening here, and the supplier in India. And as soon as everybody got on the same page, with all the right expertise, you know, connecting, within 8 hours, we had the material on a plane from Mumbai into Europe and then ultimately into our Swiss site. So this is how things are happening, you know, real time, if you will, on a daily basis, but where suppliers themselves are also caught up to some degree in the lockdowns and how we work through that over time.
Yeah, that's a great story. I can imagine you must have a lot of heroes within the MilliporeSigma organization, plus your suppliers that have partnered with you and through situations like that. That's a great story. Let me read a question that's coming from the audience. When do we do that? And there's a question around, you know, the impact of COVID-19, around how you manage inventory and optimize your inventory. How you've, you know, thought through reforecasting, you know, the business, you know, all the complexity around that. You know, maybe comment on that, Chris.
Yeah, that's a great one. It sounds like that person might have been in our working capital yesterday. You know, it's a really interesting one, right? Because in our business, I mentioned the research business, and I mentioned, you know, the academia market, and that researchers, you know, in labs in our academic institutions worldwide have really been out of business for a bit of time. So that's put a lot of pressure on us from an inventory standpoint in terms of the buildup that we have that's pent up now, waiting for that demand to come, which it's starting slowly to come, as I mentioned, in Asia and in Europe, and then eventually here in the US. But we've been trying to balance, if you will, taking action to reforecast a very statistically forecast-driven business, you know, letting the system do its job, but intervening to say, look, this is an unprecedented event. We can't let the system take its time to, let's say, reprioritize, reforecast, and reset our inventory expectations for the next bit of months. So we have had to go in and make adjustments, and we're trying to balance those adjustments with the comeback and the timing of the comeback. And we're watching data very closely. Data has been maybe one of our biggest friends throughout this process, is analyzing data in many different ways: supply chain data, sales data, customer data, country and region data, that are giving us insights into what's happening. And what are those patterns telling us as we look at Asia, China, Europe, the Americas, each on a very different time scale of what's happening here, and how can that data inform us on decisions we should make? So certainly the forecasting and the inventory levels in the research market have been tricky. On the flip side, where we're more constrained and where the demand is in higher need, our challenge has been trying to figure out how to rebalance where the inventory sits. We have, as I mentioned, a vast distribution network, and having the right inventory of finished goods in the right place at the right time is very critical for customer need. And moving that inventory and making sure that it is regionally where it needs to be has been a bigger challenge for us during these times than normal. And in fact, acting more quickly to move inventory into Asia as things began to maybe lessen there, and as Europe and the US were more in the midst of the high points of the pandemic, moving our inventory to China and to Asia so that we could be available there and ready for customers when they're coming back. And we're seeing that happen. We're seeing the uptick there, and that's been a positive thing. But it's quite a challenge, as you can imagine, to be balancing that across the network.
Pretty fluid situation, I would think. Yeah.
Indeed.
So Chris, I'm not, there's obviously been a lot of discussion in the news about various potential treatments, therapies, vaccines. So I'm not going to ask you to predict, when we're going to get the vaccine, but maybe from a biologic manufacturing perspective, and Millipore has been a leader, in this industry for many, many years. I mentioned 30 plus years ago, I was working with Millipore in a biologic manufacturing facility. There are questions about the industry's ability to supply vaccines, right? In particular, or other biologics, right? That may be therapies. Just the challenges about producing those, and in a rapid fashion. I know the company has done a lot of work regarding the biopharma facility of the future. Just talk to us a little about your optimism, I would assume, on the industry's ability, once a vaccine is discovered, to be able to produce the billions of doses, right, that we're going to need to produce, around the world. Give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's the million-dollar question, I think, at the moment, right? And I think there's quite a few, as we all know and see, in the news, and for those of us that are in the industry, many different players in the market who are looking at therapies, looking at vaccines, and also those who are supporting the testing activities. So there's a lot right now going on, and I think what will happen is things will converge, and I think you've got a lot of parallel paths going on right now, and of course that is increasing the demand for the entire supply chains, if you will, within the life science space to keep up. But as that process starts to work its way through, and as time passes on here and things get more viable than others, it will start to converge, in my view. And then I think we have something that's clearer in terms of the specific needs of the market. That said, it's still going to be unprecedented numbers and volumes of product. But I think today, with what I see and the collaboration that we have with many of these companies that we work with, the collaboration is excellent. And I think the insights that we're having into each other's world, it has helped. Meaning, we're looking at our constraints, they're looking at their constraints. We're not acting at arm's length anymore with, we're going to give you what we think you need. You're going to ask us what you think you need. It's open kimono. We're sharing forecasts. We're deeply engaged with each other's supply chains, if you will, and sharing in unprecedented ways the priorities that are really needed here. And for me, that's extremely healthy and very positive. And I think what that will do is give us the best opportunity to advance. I think what I'm also seeing is that the speed with which things are happening is unprecedented. And I mean that on a number of fronts, right? The speed with which the FDA, working together with the companies to emergency use authorize different activities, and it's healthy. I think it's also in compliance with what it needs to be in compliance with, but what we're seeing is speed. And then that speed is finding its way into the supply chain as well, with unprecedented rapid improvements in capacity and what's needed to actually ramp up here at every stage of the very deep supply chain that many of us are involved with. I'm seeing that across the board, that the commitment is there, the speed with which companies are moving to add where they need and to collaborate where they need, really positive.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Another question that's come in has also been in the news quite a bit, discussion around the repatriation of supply chains from whatever markets that may be. And this may be a little bit of a controversial question, so I'll let you answer it specifically any way you'd like. But what's your point of view on that? Do you think we're going to see a lot of that? Do you think that's needed? What's your point of view on it?
I mean, I certainly understand the issue, and I think what's happening now and where there's constraints and where there's challenges globally with the ability to move products and get products and I suppose be able to take care of one region or another. I get the concern, but honestly, Dave, I think our supply chains are so global right now, and they are so interconnected and so fluid that I don't see us going back to something that's completely local or very confined within a country and having the ability to do everything within that country or region self-sufficiently. It's just not how things operate. And we've taken so much time, I think, to globalize and to make a network here that's the most effective and efficient, in my view. And I don't see us unraveling that. So I think there's a sentiment there that, countries' locations should look differently in certain areas. And maybe there are certain products that they do need to look at differently. But I would say, by and large, my personal point of view, we are too global. And I gave you the example on the proteinase K. We, by design, have got a network of activity that crosses so many borders in so many regions of the world, and for good reason, that I don't see us unraveling that. I think what it will force us to do is think differently about business continuity and think differently about how we protect ourselves from a potential situation like this, with our choices on inventory, our choices on partners, our choices on making sure we know how to leverage the types of movement of products that we need to. But I don't see us going back to something like you just described.
So maybe building on your comment about business continuity, and you mentioned it a few times. My sense is the business continuity planning you had done in advance of this helped you quite a bit through this period. But I'm sure there are, as you reflect now, what were some of the surprises from a business continuity perspective that you just couldn't see, maybe just given the scale of this, pandemic? What did you learn?
Yeah, well, on a positive note, the time and effort that we put into business continuity planning and making sure that all of our sites, had crisis management plans and were thinking in terms of not only a crisis situation like this, but what are the criticalities within each of their locations that they need to consider, and therefore have contingency plans in place based on a particular work area, workstation, piece of equipment. A lot of that thinking had been done such that contingency plans were largely developed. So on a positive note, that was very encouraging and very helpful. Of course, the magnitude and scale of this pandemic was beyond anything that you can plan for sure, in a business continuity situation. So I think we discovered there were some holes in our thinking. And I would say broadly, the biggest lesson for me is the capacity management situation. How we look at capacity management across our network and think bigger and look at different alternatives, look at different sensitivity analyses in terms of what we might need to do and how much more quickly we may need to react. Because in our space, in our business, you require validated processes. So this isn't something that you can turn on a dime and buy something off the shelf and suddenly you're able to double and triple your output. It really does take careful thinking. So for us, I think thinking through that in a much more robust way will be a good learning from this effort.
Yeah, I can imagine. I think very few companies plan for the entire globe to shut down, right? I think you plan for hurricanes and events, but nothing of this scale. So it's
usually localized, right? You can handle it
very localized, yeah.
Or a particular region, but when it's everywhere, it's you can't plan for that for sure. Not.
Yeah. So maybe just I guess we have another 5 minutes or so. One of the questions that did come in again from the audience was, and your company's done a great job of how you've I think you called it de-densified. How you were able to kind of manage through the early days of the pandemic and keep going. I had the good fortune of having Judith Batra, your CEO, on a CEO roundtable that I hosted about 6 weeks ago. So it was kind of the halfway point, right? And he spoke passionately about what you've been doing, and it was clear you're kind of out in front of a lot of others. So what have you learned from other suppliers, other stakeholders in the industry, that you've taken from them and added to kind of the program that you've been running as it relates to returning to work and keeping things moving?
Yeah, we've been really trying to learn from anybody and everybody and watching this thing very closely. And I'd say, we've had the good fortune, or have the good fortune, of being a global company and having a significant presence in Asia, in Europe, in the Americas, that we can see the progress being made. We can follow the trends, if you will, across the world and leverage them. So we've spent quite some time with our Chinese colleagues, actually. And in fact, Udit and I have been doing a series of virtual drop-ins, as we call it, on our operating sites. Spent some time in our Nantong, China site with a virtual drop-in just a week and a half ago. And one of the things we asked them, and they do a great job of giving us lessons learned and sharing with us where they are in the process. And we've been taking that and using it as a means to think through where we are in the process in Europe, and then now, of course, where we are in the process in the US. So it's been a series of following the trends as they go across the world, and really taking the time to listen and talk to the people who have been there and done that, if you will, and then applying those lessons learned in each of the locations around the world that we're in. So that's been the most effective for us. Like I said, we have the good fortune of having that capability there. And we also, I mentioned this a few times, but I'll reinforce it again. We've got an incredible team of technical experts in our Darmstadt facility in Germany. And this has been invaluable for us in terms of thinking about testing and thinking about data management and thinking about how to, take some of these technologies that we ourselves have the capability to develop and applying them and using them real time in locations elsewhere around the world. So that's been very helpful as well.
Yeah, that's great. So Chris, maybe last question, and I'll turn it back to Emily to wrap things up. So one of there's a number of Millipore colleagues on the line. I understand. I don't know how many, but some of your colleagues have joined the webcast. What are you most proud of about your team? That you've been working so closely with over the last number of months through this pandemic, and how they've hung together to meet the needs of their customers and ultimately patients out there. What would you like to share with the group before we close?
Yeah, it's a great closing question, and thanks for that, Dave. So many things, to be honest with you, but first and foremost, it's how they've stepped up. They have not missed a beat in every aspect of what they're doing, whether they're working remotely or they're working within our plants or in our distribution network. They all recognize this call to action. They know the criticality of what we do and how important the work is, how important the products are, and where they go. Mm-hmm. And they have just absolutely stepped up. And there have been no complaints. There have been no challenges that we haven't been able to solve. And they've been incredibly creative, working incredible hours to find solutions to problems we didn't know existed, just a few short months ago. So I couldn't be more proud of them. And maybe a special shout out to what we would consider our essential team, the manufacturing folks on the shop floor, the distribution folks, in our distribution shops every day. These people never stop coming to work. So those of us that are working, in our remote rooms in our homes these days, it's a lot of work, and we're working more hours than we probably ever have before. But those individuals who come to work every single day never stopped, even when things were so uncertain and it was unclear whether safety was really acceptable. Before any of the understandings we have today were out. They did their job. They went to work and they kept this world moving, and they kept the healthcare activities in check, and they made sure that our products got where they needed to be. And for me, I couldn't be more proud of that team in particular, and they've done an amazing job.
That's great, Chris. Rightfully so. Thanks for those comments. Emily, when I turn it back to you to wrap things up, I've enjoyed speaking with you, Chris. And again, Emily, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah, this
Okay.
was really, really interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Chris. And as I actually say that with a lot of the events that we do recently is, you know, I'm curious to know if we did a repeat of this, let's say in 6 months, right? How would our perspective change? You know, how would you look back on things that you're saying now that, you know, you're doing as a company? How would that have changed? And certainly in terms of the supply chain, and as you said, it's so global, you know, will that change and turn back at some point? It really doesn't look like it will. So thank you very much for your perspectives, David, for doing the questions, monitoring the chat. Thank you very, very much. That was a very interesting hour. This webinar will be available online. We hope to be able to post it. So for those who weren't able to join us today, thank you again. I will share quickly just one quick slide. Thank again our partners, the French-American Chamber of Commerce, for inviting and organizing this, Ernst&Young, MilliporeSigma for being there. We have other events coming up, so please do check our websites for upcoming events, you know, organized by French Chamber or by the German American Business Council. There is an event coming up on June 12th on the COVID-19 impact on residential housing in the Boston area, organized by the French Chamber. There's going to be a collaboration with us on June 18th on managing mental health in the workplace. And then for actually younger audience members, we will have a LinkedIn workshop because we do know that you know, employment out there is difficult. So to rock your LinkedIn profile and set that up, that will be on June 24th. Again, thank you to our panelists, speakers, Chris, Dave, for your time today. I know the day has totally not ended for you. It's probably only going forward to the next meeting. So thank you very much. We really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thanks
All
so
the
much.
best. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.